In 2019, a man with 3 passports slipped out of his country, concealed inside a musical instrument case. This wasn't just any man. It was Lebanese billionaire Carlos Ghosn, the CEO of Japan's Nissan. How could someone of such high social standing make an escape like this? What drove him to flee? And who masterminded such a remarkable escape? Today's story dives into the world of Carlos Ghosn. Carlos Ghosn, a name that has echoed through headlines worldwide in recent years, is a man of Lebanese origin who holds 3 nationalities: Lebanese, French, and Brazilian. After graduating in France, he landed an administrative role at Michelin, the well-known French tire company. Driven and relentless, Carlos rose through the ranks, eventually leading Michelin's American division, a prestigious position in a French company with close ties to Renault, France's largest car manufacturer at the time. Renault's CEO heard of Carlos's accomplishments at Michelin and offered him a position as his deputy at Renault, which was then grappling with one of the worst crises in its history, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. But within a year of Carlos joining, things turned around, and Renault began generating profits again. This turnaround was credited to Carlos's ruthless, no-nonsense style. His approach, aimed at cutting all unnecessary expenses, fundamentally restructured Renault, shutting down several factories and laying off thousands of workers. His cost-cutting methods led to protests from employees worldwide, earning him the nickname the Cost Killer from the French media. Carlos's approach, though brutal, revived Renault, making it stronger than ever. With Renault back on its feet, he aimed even higher, envisioning an alliance that would make it a formidable rival to industry giants like Ford and Toyota. Carlos set his sights on Nissan, a Japanese carmaker famed but deeply troubled, facing an even worse crisis than Renault. When Carlos came to Nissan, it was drowning in $20 billion of debt, with only 3 of its 50 models turning a profit. Renault, under Carlos's leadership, proposed to buy a significant share of Nissan, effectively gaining control to rescue the company from collapse. This was a bold move, as the Japanese are known for their deep pride in their national identity and industry. Allowing a foreign company like Renault to acquire a controlling stake would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. At this point, Nissan was suffocating under its crisis, so much so that Japanese banks refused to lend it money. While others saw only risk, Carlos and Renault saw an opportunity. Carlos pledged that he would return Nissan to profitability within a year and clear all debts within 3. If he failed, he promised to resign and leave the company for good. Nissan accepted the terms, and in 1999, Renault purchased a 37% share, making it the dominant force at Nissan. Carlos was appointed CEO, an unprecedented move, as no foreigner had ever led a major Japanese company like Nissan. Carlos didn't waste time. Upon arriving in Japan, he visited every Nissan factory, crafting an integrated strategy to pull Nissan out of its financial woes, just as he had done for Renault. His plan was drastic. He closed 5 factories, laid off many workers, and faced waves of protests. His decisions challenged Japan's traditional ways. He declared English as Nissan's official language to support global expansion, and replaced the seniority-based promotion system with one driven by profitability incentives. This clash with Japanese tradition made Carlos many enemies, even among Nissan's top management. Yet the results spoke for themselves. Under Carlos's leadership, Nissan turned a profit in just 1 year, earning him a new title in Japan: the man with the magic touch. Carlos's reputation soared. He was celebrated in Japan and internationally. His image graced global media, and he received countless awards. A manga about his life sold over 1 million copies, transforming him into a star in Japan. Restaurants would even erupt in applause when he entered, a testament to his newfound fame and respect. Years passed, and the numbers for Nissan and Renault kept climbing. By 2005, Renault's CEO retired, and Carlos stepped in as director, making him the CEO of both Nissan and Renault simultaneously, a feat that had never been achieved before. This dual role placed immense pressure on Carlos, with many advising him to step down from one position. However, he refused, committed to leading the alliance. Carlos's salary reached $17 million annually, a high figure by Japanese standards, even though it was modest for CEOs of foreign corporations. His salary was 11 times higher than that of Toyota's CEO, Japan's largest automaker. Unsurprisingly, this disparity fueled jealousy among Japan's corporate elite, especially within Nissan's board, where resentment simmered. Living up to his reputation, Carlos enjoyed an opulent lifestyle. Lavish parties, expensive gifts for family and himself, a $10 million yacht, private jets, and luxury cars, Carlos's lifestyle clashed sharply with Japanese norms, where company heads were often seen commuting by bike. A foreign director flaunting his wealth was bound to provoke hostility. Tensions came to a head on November 19th. On that day, Carlos had a meeting scheduled with Nissan's board. Flying from Paris to Tokyo, he bid farewell to his family and boarded his private jet. But when he landed, he was met by Japanese police officers surrounding his plane. They arrested him on the spot, citing charges of financial misconduct. Carlos was shocked and confused, receiving no further explanation as he was taken to jail. The media frenzy exploded. News outlets worldwide broadcasted live coverage, while Nissan's stock plummeted. Confined to a cell and with no understanding of the events unfolding outside, Carlos awaited support from Nissan. Yet, instead of help, he learned that the board had appointed a temporary president. In a public statement, this new leader announced that Nissan's internal investigation had revealed financial misconduct conducted in cooperation with the authorities. In their investigation, Nissan's board of directors claimed to have uncovered substantial financial misconduct under CEO Carlos Ghosn's watch, leading to his immediate removal. Stunned and feeling betrayed, Carlos vehemently denied these accusations, maintaining that they were baseless. The primary allegation involved Carlos allegedly failing to declare all of his income, which the authorities viewed as tax evasion. Carlos's declared salary was transparent, but the real contention revolved around a retirement fund he planned to collect in the future. The board of directors who controlled the fund were aware of its existence. When questioned by Japanese authorities, Carlos explained that he hadn't declared the fund because he hadn't received it yet, meaning it wasn't legally required to be reported. The authorities, however, interpreted this as financial fraud, and the situation began to feel increasingly orchestrated. Carlos was held in solitary confinement at Kosugi Detention Center for 3 months, a facility typically reserved for serious offenders, an extreme measure for a nonviolent business figure. During this time, Nissan's board accused him of purchasing properties in Paris, Beirut, and Brazil on the company's dime. Carlos asserted that these properties were for work purposes and known to the board, since his dual CEO roles often required extensive travel. Ownership remained with the company, not him personally. Another accusation centered on a lavish celebration he hosted at Versailles, marking 15 years of the Renault-Nissan alliance, a date that coincidentally coincided with his birthday. This event, costing over $700,000, raised questions from the board over whether it was a corporate celebration or a personal extravagance. Carlos countered that this was a high-profile, public event, not a hidden misuse of funds, and wondered why it was only now, years later, being questioned. It became apparent to Carlos that he was being framed. But why? After nearly 2 decades leading the company, what could prompt such a betrayal? The answer lay in a merger concern. The French government had recently acquired a substantial share of Renault, sparking fears within Nissan that France might push for a full merger between the two companies. This merger could mean Nissan's identity would be subsumed under Renault, a prospect unpalatable to a nation that prides itself on its heritage. The board, seeing Carlos as the facilitator of such a merger, turned on him, effectively transforming him from a celebrated hero into a perceived villain overnight. What baffled Carlos further was that the French government and Renault, whom he had helped, remained silent amid his scandal. Not only did they refrain from defending him, but even public opinion in France shifted against him, as if a global conspiracy had taken root. Meanwhile, Carlos endured intense interrogation sessions, sometimes stretching for 14 hours without legal representation. Officials applied pressure tactics, even threatening his family in hopes of securing a confession. Carlos resisted, but after 3 months he was granted release on bail, set at 1 billion yen or $9 million, which he paid. He returned to his apartment, now under intense media scrutiny that made privacy impossible. In this tense climate, Carlos prepared to publicly address the allegations. He announced a press conference, but less than 24 hours after his tweet, Japanese authorities arrested him a second time to prevent him from speaking out. Fortunately, his lawyers had preemptively recorded a video statement, which would be his backup if he were detained again. This second arrest kept him in prison for 21 more days, after which he was released on a higher bail of $5 million, bringing his total to $14 million. The Japanese authorities imposed strict conditions for his release: confiscation of his Lebanese and Brazilian passports, and restriction of his movements within Japan. Most notably, he was forbidden from contacting his wife. A harsh measure Carlos believed was intended to weaken him by isolating him from his main source of support. Carlos realized he couldn't hope for a fair trial. With Japan's prosecutor win rate at 99.4%, his chances seemed bleak. Knowing he was outmatched, he began to plan his escape. Using a phone acquired covertly and making calls only in the bathroom to avoid surveillance, he assembled a trusted team. This group of 10 to 15 associates, whose identities remain undisclosed to this day for their safety, considered several escape options. Traveling by sea to Lebanon was dismissed for being too slow, leaving air travel as the only viable option. However, with Carlos banned from international flights, they needed an airport with minimal security. After scouting multiple locations, they knew the plan required precision. The team finally identified an airport with a significant security loophole: Osaka's smaller airport, known for its calm, low-traffic environment. Large items, such as the massive boxes used for transporting musical instruments, bypassed X-ray inspection entirely because the scanners were designed only for smaller luggage. This discovery sparked a bold plan: smuggling Carlos Ghosn inside one of these boxes. The scheme was as daring as it was unconventional. 2 men posing as members of a band would fly to Tokyo by private jet, carrying large instrument cases. After supposedly performing in Tokyo, they would leave on the same day, claiming they had a concert in Istanbul. The plan was quick in and out travel, minimizing the chances of being noticed. The 2 men, later identified as Mike Taylor, a former U.S. Special Forces soldier, and George Zayek, reportedly a former Lebanese soldier, would act as musicians in this high-stakes operation. At first, Carlos himself was unsure if the plan could actually work, but with few alternatives, he resolved to go through with it. His primary challenge now was evading the surveillance surrounding his Tokyo residence. He frequently noticed men positioned near his house, likely Japanese authorities tracking his movements. When Carlos consulted his lawyer, he learned that while authorities technically had no legal right to monitor him this way, proving misconduct was another matter. Carlos came up with a diversion, inviting scandal-chasing journalists to his residence, which would make the informants disappear temporarily, since being exposed by the press would embarrass the authorities. The team decided on December 29, 2019, as the day for Carlos's escape. It was a carefully chosen date, near the end of the year, a time when many employees are on holiday and those remaining may be less experienced. This seasonal factor gave them an added advantage. Carlos would disguise himself heavily, wearing a large jacket, winter hat, and mask, blending in easily since masks are commonly worn in Japan. Once again, he summoned journalists, causing his shadows to vanish from their watch. At that moment, he left his residence unnoticed. Carlos met up with Taylor and Zayek at the Grand Hyatt Hotel, where they briefed him on staying low profile until they reached the airport. They took a taxi to the train station and traveled to Osaka, eventually checking into a hotel where the smuggling box awaited. Carlos climbed into it, verifying he could breathe, and his team drilled small air holes just in case. Covered with a white cloth for concealment, he settled into the box, which was labeled as containing valuable instruments. The hotel staff, on request, handled it carefully and loaded it into a truck alongside a second, legitimate instrument case. They drove to the airport. At the customs checkpoint, Carlos, hidden in the box, listened intently. One of the men chatted casually with the customs officer, recounting a successful Tokyo concert and thanking the staff for their cooperation. Since these same customs officials had checked the equipment earlier that day upon their arrival, there was no suspicion, and they allowed the boxes to proceed without further inspection. Jokingly, one officer suggested the men might be smuggling beautiful women in the boxes, but the humor did not prompt a check. Luck and the holiday season understaffing played to Carlos's favor, allowing them to move through customs unhindered. Once on board the private jet, Carlos waited in the box for about half an hour, tense and fearful. Only after feeling the plane's ascent did he allow himself relief. Confident he had finally escaped Japanese soil, his companions unlocked the box, freeing him, and he remained hidden in the jet's back compartment until their arrival in Istanbul. In Istanbul, he was transferred directly to another plane, bound for Beirut, without setting foot in the airport. Less than an hour later, Carlos landed in Beirut, where a customs officer recognized and warmly greeted him. He was finally reunited with his family, knowing he was safe. News of Carlos's escape spread rapidly worldwide. The Japanese authorities were stunned, blaming his lawyers and accusing them of negligence in monitoring him, though surveillance was never their responsibility. Japan even issued an Interpol arrest warrant, yet Lebanon, which does not extradite its citizens, promised to protect him. Shortly after, Carlos held a press conference in Beirut, publicly denouncing what he called a lack of justice in Japan and sharing details of his ordeal. Since then, Carlos has given numerous interviews, both to Arabic and international media outlets, and his story has been the subject of documentaries. However, he has remained discreet about specific escape details to protect those who assisted him. In a final gesture, the Lebanese government offered to handle his case domestically, but Japan refused, persisting in its extradition requests. Carlos continues to reside in Lebanon, as both Japanese and French judicial systems hold cases against him. Carlos frequently speaks openly about his experiences, casting a sharp contrast with the opaque Japanese judicial system he accuses of bad faith. While the complete truth may still be obscured, Carlos Ghosn's journey has stirred intense curiosity, and the mystery surrounding his case lingers, waiting for the full story to one day emerge. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel for more interesting videos.